Hello and welcome back on Monday to my show. I realise that I must be in some kind of emotionally overwrought state with lots of things pending, lots of things hanging over me, and a few stresses going on. I realise that I must be overwrought because last night, when I saw a clip of Paddington Bear on stage for the new musical, it's the first footage of actual Paddington on stage and the audience reacting. I got a bit teary, which means I think that I'm feeling a bit overwrought. I'm overreacting to things, but it does press a few buttons for me. Paddington's been an amazingly important part of my life, my creative life, my reading life, forever. My first trip to the theatre was to see Paddington. Well before the current musical, in the mid-70s, there was a touring show that I saw at the age of 5 or 6 with my infant school class, and we sat on the front row at Darlington Civic Theatre, which was and is a kind of chocolate box theatre with gold gilt and angels and red velvet everywhere, and this stage that we were sat right in front of, and I had no idea what was going to go on. I'd never been to the theatre before, and the set was the Browns' house in cross-section. And when they brought Paddington on, he was about 6 foot tall, it seemed like, and furry. And I remember being, along with the rest of my class, terrified at first. I think by then I'd read the book. Either we'd had it read to us, or we'd had a bit of it read to us, and I'd read it for myself. And I was a firm believer in Paddington and read all the books. I think they went as far as Paddington Takes the Test within my own childhood, and then later there were books in the 2000s, which I was delighted that Michael Bond was doing and collected up in later years. So I think there was about 10 that I read as a kid. And I had Collins, Lyons paperback editions, which I've still got some of, and I've got various other copies I've picked up over the years, having lost my original set, of course. And I've collected up some ex-library hardbacks. Like all of my things, they are reading copies. I'm a collector of books, but I'm not somebody who collects pristine, perfect, almost untouchable copies of books. That wouldn't be any good for me. I've seen that there's a new folio edition of A Bear Called Paddington, the first book, that looks very swanky, but I don't know. My copy of the first book is currently, this is the one that I have. It's a reprint from 1965 that's been vandalised by its original owner. I don't know if you can't probably see there, but it belongs to Catherine A. Wood. I can't see what that says underneath. There's more details. I don't know what that means. Belongs to Miss Catherine Ann Wood. Oh, she from Stockport Convent, Form 11. And then there's an address in Stockport back in the 60s, presumably, in loopy handwriting. But this is my copy that I've just sat down this morning to reread because of this sudden flash of nostalgia, and also something steadying about Paddington, about the version of, I mean, it's all been said before, I know, the version of Britain that it represents, the idea of immigration and welcoming people. He literally comes over on a small boat. Anyway, that's my first book in the series, A Bear Called Paddington. I'll show you the others that I got in these library editions. These were the ones, copies like these are the ones that I would have borrowed from our town library and our school library. These are out of order, but I think this is the second one. More about Paddington. Probably 10 years ago, I was getting these on eBay, and they've been in library sales for 25p at some point. I was paying about £4 or £5, foolishly. I know, foolishly. But how nice to have copies where you've got lots of space and you can see the Peggy Fortnum drawings properly in a way that you couldn't often in the paperbacks. So that's more about Paddington, which I think came out 58? No, I can't see that. 59. So the year afterwards, he was straight into Paddington as a series. Straight away, the second book came out a year afterwards. This contains, at the end, the Christmas chapters. And chapter 7, in More About Paddington, Christmas, is one of my favourite things, where Paddington produces presents for the whole family, and there's some kerfuffle about looking up the chimney, and coal dust everywhere. There's a copy, there's an anthology, a Christmas anthology somewhere, I think I can see it kind of behind the stacks, that's illustrated not by Peggy Fortnum, but there's some drawings by the man who did the snowman. It's hopeless. Somebody will tell me. Of course, somebody will tell me. And When the Wind Blows, that fella. And he does some Paddington pictures, and they're wonderful to see. That's a copy really worth collecting. Paddington Abroad, which I guess is, we're into the 60s by then. And again, published by Collins, 61, Trouble at the Airport. Yep, they didn't break the formula. It was Peggy Fortnum every time. Paddington takes the air. And each time, they're collections of stories, linked stories. 1970, this one. You know, there's not often an overarching plot. Maybe Paddington Abroad, where they go on holiday, is something that pulls them together. But mostly they're little adventures. And that suits me. Because I read these so early, I kind of think that as the perfect form for a book. Comings and Goings at number 32 is the final story in this one. Paddington marches on. What year was this? Oh, this was a present from Michael Stevens at BBC Audio one Christmas. He knows that I love Paddington. 65 this was from. I don't know what year I got this as a present. In the last 10 years, I think. And Paddington at Large, I think, was one of my favourites. I had the paperback Collins copy and had that for years and years. And probably the one I've read the most, maybe. Yeah, it's the one with the bargain basement. Trouble in the Bargain Basement. There are bookmarks stuck in every one of these. I've clearly, over the years, just dipped back in at different points. But it's quite nice to go back to the beginning and read the very start again. You think you know stories because they become classics and you think you know them. And you don't often go back and reread them. And I've just noticed these are numbered. It's like Wind in the Willows. You think you know it. And then you sit down again and it's transporting to go back right to the start and to see exactly how it was at the beginning. Anyway, those are my hardbacks. I've got various other things. There's the Blue Peter storybooks, because there was a story in each of the Blue Peter annuals by Michael Bond for years and years, and they collected those in 2 volumes. There's a book of play scripts. Then there's 2 or 3 more recent ones in the kind of 2000s and 10s that he wrote. And a couple of recent books where it's like The Jolly Postman, where there's letters folded into the text as a kind of pop-up thing. And I've bought those for presents, but I don't have copies of those. I sound like a mad Paddington collector, and I kind of am, but that's the heart of it. These battered, well-read ex-library copies. And there's nothing I do to get rid of these. These are in the permanent collection. Okay, I shall go. I shall get back to reading the first one again. I just wanted to say, this is what I'm doing, and I'm reading Catherine A. Wood of Stockport Convent in the 1960s. I'm reading her copy. Okay, goodbye everyone. Take care.